It's your breaking news, World War III update. OMG, did the global markets ever go for a wild ride today? Markets plunged. Black Monday was a very real thing for many countries around the world to the tune of $6.5 trillion. Wiped off the global markets in a day, and it would have been a lot worse. We were only spared in North America, allegedly, by a fake tweet that was sent out that caused the market to rally early in the morning. The market opened down nearly 6% and then rallied to plus 5% in the span of 25 minutes. This is the single largest trading range in human history in the shortest period of time. Okay, we're talking about trillions of dollars in fluctuations in the span of 25 minutes. Imagine being the sucker, okay, who sold here and then thought everything was great and then bought here. And look at this, almost perfect. Like, I mean, you could study this in physics. John Nash would love this. This whipsaw effect that you have here. And of course, everything's sort of plateaued and stabilized by the end of the day, but it's about to get a lot worse. You're not going to believe this. When I first seen this, I was completely stunned, because not only did Donald Trump say that by tomorrow, April 8th, 2025, the United States will impose additional tariffs on China to the tune of 50 more percent. 50 more, that's 110% tariff on everything at Walmart. Are you kidding me? Okay, now listen to this. It gets worse. Do you think China would acquiesce to these demands? Nuh-uh. China said, go fuck yourself, Trump. We'll see your 50% and maybe even raise you a bit as well. That's essentially what they said. So we are now in the midst of a fully fledged trade war. And you know what these jokers are doing on Wall Street? Not Wall Street, because it's retail who is jumping back into the frying pan right now. They are buying the dip. They're excited. They think it's over. Even though Trump just stated, I mean, for Trump to get this specific, and now that we know, at least on the tariff issue anyways, he clearly isn't bluffing. This is a full-on trade war, and China would not have committed to a 34% tariff if they didn't mean business either. They know what this means. The Chinese have been stockpiling grain, oil, metals, and gold. They knew this day was coming. They knew that the decoupling was coming, and they knew world war was coming. Now, the Americans are in a very difficult predicament because a lot of this centers around Iran. The Chinese buy $35 billion worth of oil from the Iranians. So they're essentially funding Iran's proxy network and their axis of resistance and axis of evil, as we call it, against the Zionist Pax American complex. So that's problematic, and that's where this whole thing stems. So if the United States is now threatening the Iranians, they're essentially threatening the Chinese. The Chinese could now flip the table because they've been disincentivized to negotiate with the Americans. And take a look at what Trump says down here. He says, additionally, and this was, I don't know if this was just some impetuous last-minute addition to the tweet, but this is incredibly combative language. Additionally, all talks with China concerning their requested meetings with us will be terminated. Negotiations with other countries which have also requested meetings, I don't get the rest of the tweet there, let's see here, scroll down, will be taking place immediately. All the countries that are wanting to do deals aren't really that significant in the grand scheme of things, okay? So understand what's happening here. This is all about China. And that line, additionally, all talks with China concerning their requested meetings with us will be terminated. Them's be fighting words. Now, if you're the Chinese and you're looking at this, you're saying, why wouldn't we arm Iran to the tits at this point in time, right? You're waging a war on Russia, who we get our energy from. You're waging a war on Iran, who we get our energy from. You're waging a war against the North Koreans, who we are essentially are on our doorstep, and you're surrounding us in the Indo-Pacific. Why wouldn't we arm Iran? I mean, what incentive do we have not to anymore when we suspend all trade with you, which is what 110% tariff would effectively do. Now, I think it's not 110, it's not 1-to-1, okay? It's going to be like a 50% increase. You can basically have it, okay? So if there's 110% tariff on the landed cost of something as it's manufactured, what the retailer sells it for is usually 40% more than that because they have to make their margins for logistics and distribution. So really, when they talk about a 60% tariff, whatever it is right now, that means essentially a 30% bump in price that ultimately will be passed on to the consumer. The companies will absorb a little bit of that, but that means that's less money for R&D, less money for their employees, less money for expansion. It just causes economic contraction all around. So this is now going to nuke, and I can't understand exactly what the purpose of this would be, because the jobs that this is going to create are going to be crappy jobs, most of which are going to be automated. And what you're really doing, and even Reagan said this, and this is why he was against tariffs, is because it's basically a state-sponsored corporatism. Because instead of having to compete and to make innovative products and innovative methods that are going to be able to compete in the global marketplace, you're basically subsidizing it. It's like welfare for corporations. So why would you feel the need to create a better product at a cheaper price if you know that you didn't have any international competition? So tariffs are the most communistic thing you can possibly do. So, and the whole US dollar thing factors into this as well. Now we're going to have more dollars because our dollars are going to be not viewed as positively around the world. And of course, the Chinese are already selling off their US treasuries as a result of this news. And you can expect that to accelerate into the future. And that's going to devalue the US dollar around the world. So where are you going to spend those dollars? You're going to spend it on the stuff that's already here. The prices of everything are going to explode as a result of this. But understand the reason why they're doing this. It's all about Thucydides' trap. The Chinese are rising. They've reached a point where they're almost too powerful. Okay, they're almost to a point, and this is why they're trying to move the factories to India, where it's still like second world in a lot of places. And so they'll do that until India is too powerful. But if they continue this model with the Chinese, China is going to get insurmountably powerful. Their sphere of influence is going to outclass the US, who has, for the last 50 years at least, been the preeminent global economic hegemon. And as such, they're going to be in a situation where they're not going to be able to win, not be able to come out on top. So what they're doing right now is they're trying to crash the Chinese economy with the hopes that that's going to happen, but I don't think that's going to happen. China has the industrial base. We are 10 years behind the Chinese, okay? If the Chinese, and this is the problem, and I don't know if they think this far ahead, but all the Chinese have to do is beat those plowshares into swords in an industrial sense, make all of those machines that are making us cheap products that we can actually afford and that has been deflationary and basically acting as a counterweight to the real inflation that's been happening over the years. They're going to turn those factories into weapons producing factories. That's what they're going to do. And what are we going to produce? How are we going to build weapons? We don't have the factories. Oh, we'll just get Elon to build us some, what do they call them, gigafactories for missiles and stuff like that. He can do that really quick. Well, how are you going to do that without a global supply chain? Really? You get everything from China. Rare earth metals, all that stuff comes from China. That's going to drive the price of commodities through the roof to reindustrialize. That's why these prices in silver, gold, copper, these things are going to skyrocket in the future. That's not financial advice. It's just when you do the geopolitical math, it just makes sense, doesn't it? Now, here's what else is going on in the world. I'm going to give you the rapid fire take on all of this. This is what's going down. Massive weapon shipments continue to move into the Middle East in the last 12 hours. I'm talking record amounts of weapon shipments are moving to the Middle East. A ground invasion of Yemen has now more or less been confirmed. Yes, you heard correct. They're going to do a ground invasion of Yemen. I think it's looking as though maybe the Iranian operation will be postponed for a little bit until they can get Yemen under control to a degree that they think is sufficient to proceed to the final boss, which of course will be Iran. We have record-breaking military budget unveiled by Pete Hegseth, unabashedly stating that they have now created a $1 trillion U.S. military budget, when just a few days ago they were bragging about how, we're trying to save money and we're cutting troop deployments and all this stuff. It was all just a bunch of BS. Now, $1 trillion, nominally speaking, is not more. It's not a record budget in real terms. When you factor in inflation, I mean, the U.S. military budget, I think probably during the Iraq War, was in real terms the highest it's ever been. Nonetheless, it's a sign that they're hell-bent on rearming, and Doge ain't touching the Pentagon. That's for sure. And if they are, could you imagine if after all the cuts, they're now spending $1 trillion? So then you would say, well, in real terms, they might actually be have the record. We also have obligatory indirect talks with Iran this weekend. I think these are all for show. This is primarily for the purpose of Trump not looking too weak in the face of Netanyahu coming to the White House, who he assisted in terms of pushing in his chair yet again. Another great photo op for the memers on the internet. And basically, this is all for the sake of them saying, well, we tried. We tried and Iran was being irrational. Now, I'll get into the details of that in just a moment, but that's essentially what's happening. Russia intercepted 3 French fighter jets in the Black Sea, so things are still heating up. Russia recently hit a residential complex. It turns out that there were actually NATO officers in that complex, and they didn't hit it just once. First, they hit it once, and then they hit it when the rescue crews were going in to get the bodies and to assist those who had been injured by the initial blast. So they double tapped it, and apparently there were some high-ranking NATO officers in there. So that war is still raging. There's a honeybee die-off in North America. A record amount of colonies have died. 1.6 million bee colonies are dead, and if the bees are dead, then we don't eat, folks. That's just how it is. We need the pollinators. Germany is preparing their children for war. Now, I'm going to try to speak on these matters as dispassionately as possible because I don't get political on this channel. I just try to view things as they are. And the jury's still out. Is Trump, is what he's doing, is it genius? Is it imprudence? Who knows? I guess we're going to find out in just a moment. Now, here's the tweet that was later determined to be fake. Now, this actually isn't the original poster of the tweet. They were just quoting that person, okay, who apparently, I think this person was either fed misinformation because it was a trusted, blue checkmark, verified account on X who said this, and it just went viral, okay? President Trump is considering a 90-day pause on tariffs for all countries except for China, but I'm not so convinced that, because we've seen tweets like that before, and for something to move the needle so aggressively in such a short period of time, and then for it to continue sideways, to me, that tells me that there's something else. There was some hedge fund buying. Somebody was buying. Maybe Buffett bought today. Who knows? Because we don't really know what he buys until the quarterly report, I believe. So, or at least that's when he's obligated to disclose it. So we don't know. Maybe it was the Fed. Maybe somebody was backstopping the markets, plunge protection. Who knows? But that's strange. I don't think it was strictly chalked up to that. Now, here's an interesting, this is a tweet from S.L. Canton. And he talks about, and this is why I say I'm speaking in an objectivist way here, but of course he frames it in the context of MAGA logic. So let's hear what he has to say. Tariffs are great and can be used to eliminate the income tax. Okay, that's the motivation, right? To eliminate the income tax. So you want more imports in order to collect more tariffs. No, imports are bad. We want to make everything here in America. So then how would you collect tax if everything was made in America? Or how would you make up for that shortfall and servicing the massive amounts of debt without having some sort of debt jubilee and writing off the debt, which of course would nullify the US dollar as a global reserve currency? Zero imports equals zero tariff revenue equals can't eliminate income tax. Sometimes, if you can't say it simply, then it probably isn't true. Now, Trump is saying, in the presence of Netanyahu, who didn't appear to countenance Trump's words here, when Trump said that he's willing to have direct talks with Iran. Now, I'm going to give you the details of this in just a moment, but first I want to give you the skinny on what's going on and the context of all this, because what you're hearing here is classic, okay? Now, for Trump, I mean, at this point, he could just go all in, start a war. He could probably start dropping nukes on Iran, and they could say, well, we just nuked the sites and nobody was hurt, and it was very targeted and it was surgical, and they would find a way and people would start to rationalize it, and they'd be like, okay, well, maybe that was, we prevented a big war, kind of the same excuse they used to bomb Hiroshima and Nagasaki, only this time it would just be limited to a nuclear facility, right? So the amount of actual human casualties would be relatively low, at least in the short term. Who knows what sort of radiological catastrophe would happen if you nuke a facility with radioactive centrifuges. Now, a resident nuclear physicist friend of the channel, Kai the Radiation Guy, told me that the state that the enriched uranium is in right now would not necessarily be as toxic. But I have to get more details from him on that. So if it was nuked, if the United States were to even conventionally target this, these subterranean complexes that are housing this enriched uranium, that it wouldn't be a massive dirty bomb-like disaster, at least not as bad as you might think. But again, I'll have to get some more details on that before I can speak to it with any degree of confidence. But here's what's going on. Iran has issued notices to Iraq, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Turkey, and Bahrain that any support for a U.S. attack on Iran, including the use of their air, space, or territory by the U.S. during an attack, would be considered an act of hostility, thereby threatening all these countries. Now, of course, we now have confirmation that another THAAD, one of the most advanced air defense systems, there was a little bit of doubt as to whether or not this story was true, but it has in fact been 100% confirmed. So the Israelis now have two THAAD air defense systems. They're also moving Patriot missile defense systems and who knows what else, because there's just been so many flights of these massive military cargo planes into the region 24/7. Guys, they're preparing to go to war. When all else fails, you know what happens. They take you to war. Now, according to an Israeli senior official, so take with a big grain of salt, they are saying that we are preparing for the possibility that Iran will make a mistake and attack us with hundreds of missiles once again. True promise 3, anybody? The cooperation between us and the Americans in defense is going to another level, they claim. It is the best ever. The additional battery that landed here is part of our basket of operations with them. Now, as far as I know, each of these THAAD systems has something like 50 missiles. So even if you had 100 of these, and even if they had a 100% success rate, which they likely won't, because of course Iran could utilize a combination of hypersonics and ballistic missiles, most of which made it through to their target in Israel last time. I could only imagine that many of those missiles would make it through, and that this is really just to create false peace of mind and confidence in the population there when they do start off this war. Trump's deadline for the Iranians is about 1 month away, basically at the end of April. Now, Trump does have an inveterate tendency to make a lot of deadlines without acting on them. That said, we have seen him stay true to the tariff cause, at least up until this point. So we'll have to see if the same holds true in terms of these geostrategic matters or not. The IRGC gets a fire at will notice for drones and UAVs. Now, this is like 3 days old news. Now, I apologize, guys. I originally was going to talk about this stuff in the video I made last night at like midnight, but for some reason my phone camera just cut off, and it said, you're not recording anymore, even though it said I had time left to record. So maybe it was the Illuminati, who knows? Anyways, here's the skinny on that. The IRGC Aerospace Forces have issued a fire at will order to all air defense units. Now, of course, this is something that the Iranians have to be very careful with, because of course they've shot down commercial airliners in the past, and that would almost guarantee that nobody would ever want to fly to the country ever again, and there would be a no-fly zone, an involuntary one, imposed over the country of Iran, which of course many countries use that airspace because it's just easier to commute the way the crow flies. But in the case of a positive identification of a hostile aircraft and its intrusion into the sovereign airspace of the Islamic Republic, regional air defense commanders do not require higher up approval to engage the target. Now, they later claim that this is just for drones and UAVs, but it's not always easy to distinguish what's what. Okay, so we very well could see the makings of another disastrous situation like we've seen post-Soleimani assassination in 2020. The U.S. allegedly now is seeing record deployments to the Middle East amidst Trump's nuclear ultimatum for Iran. U.S. deployed fighter squadrons, stealth bombers, air defenses, munitions near Iran and Yemen as March cargo flights have risen by 50% compared to the previous peak. Guys, they're getting ready for war. What else do you need to know? Now, this doesn't mean it's going to come immediately, and it's starting to, in fact, look like this might be delayed just a little bit. But what we're going to see this weekend, this impetuous move towards having talks without any real game plan, and just think about how the Russians approach this and how delicate they've been, because they realize the importance of these talks lest they fail. It's one thing to have the possibility of talks on the horizon. You can always pull that out of your back pocket. If you haven't talked yet, you could say, okay, let's talk, right? Before things reach that critical mass of escalation. But as soon as you go and talk to them, if you don't have a plan, and if you just come with the same ultimatums, then that's a very sensitive situation, and you run the risk of making things much, much worse if you go into talks without a plan. It's almost better that you don't go into talks. Now, the hastiness with which Trump is approaching this tells you that this is all for show, because I believe that first they would want to establish some kind of framework for the conversation. Now, these talks are indirect. Trump was saying that they're going to be direct, but it turns out, according to 3 Iranian officials, anonymous officials, that these talks are going to be indirect, and thus who knows exactly what the purpose is. Perhaps it is just laying a framework. But Trump is at least making it out as though this is kind of a make or break conversation, not leaving too much room for missteps. Netanyahu sees the prospect of a deal as low. Well, that's not at all surprising. Netanyahu was, Trump was making some statements while he was in the Oval Office. I don't think I have the video here to show you of Netanyahu's responses and facial gestures as they pertain to Trump fielding questions. He basically sat there silent. He wasn't excoriated like Zelensky was. But Trump had to demonstrate at least a little bit of strength because, of course, there's been a lot of rumors that he's somehow Netanyahu's bitch. Now, I think it's kind of a two-way street. Did the Israeli lobby help get Trump elected? Yeah, there's no doubt about that. Everybody agrees with that. There's a lot of Israeli war hawks surrounding Trump, so there's a lot of pressure on Trump to continue in this direction. But I don't think it's as one-sided as a lot of people think. I think Trump still has a lot of agency in this relationship. Anyways, according to Axios, Barak Ravid, well, Prime Minister Netanyahu believes that the chances of a nuclear deal between the U.S. and Iran is extremely low. He will present the U.S. president with what a good deal should look like, which of course is likely going to be something that the Iranians will never agree to. Understand that the conditions that the United States has is that the Iranians must basically get rid of their nuclear program, that they must disarm their ballistic missile capabilities so they don't have the capabilities to deploy a nuclear weapon, and even eat away at their conventional weapons capability. So effectively, completely infringing upon the sovereignty of the Iranians, which the Iranians have already stated that they'll never accept. So the Netanyahu proposition is going to be very much like all of the proposals to both Ukraine and Russia thus far. They're going to be rebuked sharply, and it's basically going to be, well, with Iran, I think the speed of it all, this signifies that this war is going to happen much, much faster. Because remember, the war against Iran is actually a war against China. Remember that at all times. $35 billion worth of oil is what is purchased from the Iranians to China. Okay, so this is a problem that has global implications. You can't look at these conflicts in isolation. Now, the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians are going to be meeting today, I believe. But again, this is a bit of a Mexican standoff as well, because the Russians have a vested interest in Iran fighting a conventional war. Now, the Chinese also have somewhat of an interest in Iran fighting a war, but not if it compromises their oil supply. They still need to get their oil out of the Strait of Hormuz, that they presumably could unless the US and surrounding countries impose an embargo against Iran, which I assume they would. And good luck getting insurance through the Strait of Hormuz. Even if it is a shadow tanker fleet, they're not going to want to run the risk of having those vessels confiscated, getting into altercations with the US Navy in the Arabian Sea or wherever these things are going to emerge. So yeah, this is going to get, it's a very sticky situation. Both sides somewhat would stand to gain from America focusing its efforts and being drawn in to a quagmire in the Middle East once again that they can't win. And the Chinese, remember, the Chinese and the Russians, when they were relatively weak, and it was primarily the Chinese, but they were the ones who helped the Vietnamese guerrillas fight against the United States back when China was dirt poor. So imagine in the mountains, in the desert, in the hottest of hot seasons, okay, fighting the Iranians who are used to that terrain. They know every inch of that terrain. They have home field advantage. It's an incredibly challenging terrain. It's a massive country, and now they're getting armed with by the Chinese. Possibly, China's just going to throw them a few nukes. Because again, we haven't given, I mean, you would want to wait for this kind of thing. Why would they do this now? Why wouldn't they wait until after? And it makes me think that they're just going to war with China. I mean, they've openly said it as much. I don't think there's ever been such an explicitly anti-Chinese administration. Okay, so that's Pete Heggs has said that that's our primary adversary in the 21st century is the Chinese, and they're our main enemy. Possible land war with Yemen. Now this is from, who's this from? This is from Schizo Intel. So these are the defensive fortifications in the parts of Iran that they might attempt to do some sort of landed invasion. Now get a load of this. As per CNN, reporting regional diplomatic sources state that preparations are underway for a coordinated ground offensive in Yemen, expected to launch from the south along the coast and from the east with the objective of recapturing the strategic port of Hodeidah from the Houthis. The joint operation may involve naval support from both Saudi Arabia and the United States. Now, if that happens with the Saudis, I would expect the Houthis to unload on Saudi Aramco. I think that's what's going to happen, if this, in fact, is what's going to happen. It is highly unlikely the U.S. will deploy ground troops beyond a limited number of special forces tasked with assisting in the coordination of airstrikes. U.S. support will likely focus on logistical assistance and for the provision of key munitions to joint forces in Yemen. So that is what's going on in that side of town, okay? Now, in terms of, I think we touched on that. Now, in terms of the specific talks with Iran, Trump has warned that if the talks fail, Iran will be in great danger because they cannot have a nuclear weapon. Again, that's not the only precondition for any sort of rapprochement. It's that they can't have any nuclear materials and they have to completely suspend their nuclear program. In fact, Netanyahu was advocating for a Libya-style denuclearization as a model. We all know what happened to Gaddafi. So there's no way that the Iranians are going to fall for that one. I mean, the Iraqis fell for that, and look what happened to them. Trump previously sent a letter to the Ayatollah, which was rejected outright. It was an ultimatum that they need to suspend their nuclear program. They rejected that. Now, Iran has still not officially confirmed this meeting, although Abbas Araghchi dismisses direct talks as meaningless and questions Trump threats. But I believe he did say that there would be some indirect talks in Oman between an Omanian mediator. So it's important to also understand that it was Trump who exited the JCPOA, which the Iranians at the time anyways were thought to be in compliance with according to the International Atomic Energy Agency, and that was of course in keeping their enrichment, their enriched uranium below a certain grade. They were in compliance with that according to the International Monitoring Agency that does that kind of work. Now, you could make the argument that, well, yeah, but it shortens their breakout window and they're getting too capable and yada, 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 but that's what it is. So if Trump didn't agree to that deal, he's not going to agree to a deal that's an equivalent, and the Iranians are not going to accept anything less. So we're implacably hurtling towards Armageddon in the Middle East. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of time. Now, Iran is having its own power generation crisis of sorts. The company Tavanir has announced that there will be electricity cuts across Iran. They stated that only 1/3 of power generated from hydroelectric plants can be utilized due to an ongoing water crisis. So it's hot in Iran and just in the Middle East in general, but it's been getting much, much hotter in the last 20, 30 years or so as a result of the thing that is always a big trigger for people because they can't separate the science from the insane policies like carbon taxation, but let's not go there. Anyways, 10% of Iran's electricity comes from hydroelectric plants. He also stated that 30% of Iran's power plants are in need of maintenance, and Iran will need to rely on nuclear energy. Now, is this just Iran pretending that they need nuclear energy? After all, they have an unlimited amount of oil. They could have fossil fuel energy or electricity generation if they wanted to. Now, do they have something against that? I don't know. At least that's the argument that Trump likes to make. Like, you don't need nuclear energy. But again, it's a question of sovereignty, I suppose, at the end of the day. Now, where else are we going here? Okay, so this is a map just showing you who's prepping. Okay, maybe let's talk about this right now. All I got to say with respect to war and with respect to prepping, when a government tells you to prep, it's probably not only too late, but they're also doing it because they want something from you, okay? If they are telling you that it's time to prepare, it's because they're getting ready to take something from you. They're never going to tell you to prepare when times are good because that means less government, because prepping is inherently anti-government, not in the sense that you want to overthrow the government, but in the sense that you are self-sufficient, so you don't need government institutions to look after you. So if there's too many preppers, that means smaller government, right? So when the government is saying, hey, you need to prepare, you know there's a catch. So when they say, like Germany comes out and says, you know what, we got to start preparing our children for war, what they're really saying is they're going to draft your children for World War III. School children should be prepared for the worst. Crisis response training should be introduced into school curricula, something that the Russians have been doing for the longest time, I should add. And emergency supplies should be stored in every home, the German ministry spokesperson reportedly proposed. The European Commission has recently recommended that, with that corny video that I still want to do a dedicated reaction to because it's hilarious, that EU citizens stockpile essential supplies, including food and water, to sustain themselves for at least 3 days in emergencies. Poland and Norway have also reinstated Cold War era measures such as bomb shelters, bunkers, mass military training. Sweden and Finland have already distributed guides to citizens, blah, 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 blah. Old news, stuff we warned you about years ago, and it's all coming true. And now pretty much every European country, as put together by this very nice infographic by the Daily Mail. Their journalism completely sucks and is unreliable, but they make the best infographics. So you can see here countries that have distributed survival guides, you know, Sweden, Finland, all the Baltic states, Latvia chief among them, Lithuania released a really good one, Poland, of course. Guess they haven't done that. I'm pretty sure they've probably done something like that there too. Germany, France, so pretty much everybody's got their survival guides. In terms of rearmament, the Germans are full on in that. France, Italy's rearming. Poland, big time rearmament. The Baltics, whatever odd broken down tank they can muster, they'll do. Conscription plans, of course, that's the big one. That's pretty much all the intermarium countries, including Italy, Germany, Sweden, and I'm not sure why Norway's not on here because I know they've done a lot of preparations as well. War bunkers, so they're building this 600-mile, I can't remember what they're calling it, but some kind of fortification along the Baltic states with Belarus and Russia. Okay, so that's the Baltic defensive line. It says it right there, Nate. Come on, get with the times here. All right, now, probably one of the biggest stories that I probably should have talked about first, because this will be the story of our generation when it happens. And it is that the Chinese have encircled Taiwan, and it's another record-setting incursion into Taiwanese airspace, okay? This is the Straight Thunder 2025 exercise. 135 People's Liberation Army aircraft tracked around Taiwan is one of the biggest two-day totals on record, with only April 2023 and September 2023 being higher. 38 PLA Navy ships detected represents the third highest to date, topped only in May of 2024. And of course, these exercises are still ongoing. So the fact that this is all happening in the thick of a trade war and a pending war with Iran is, I believe, a shot across the bow to the United States that they're deadly serious about imposing this embargo. And that's exactly what it looks like when you're looking at the positioning of these ships around Taiwan. I mean, this is crazy serious when you really think about what's happening here. And when this happens, the United States claims that they're going to burn down all the fabs. This is what a congressman had said. The Taiwanese are like, whoa, 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 wait a minute, right? And this is why perhaps Trump can't completely abandon the Ukrainians at this point, because if he wants the Taiwanese to play ball, at least until they can build them some chip manufacturing facilities in the United States, well, they have to at least pretend to be backing the Ukrainians, even though the United States still does very much have a vested interest in keeping the Russians at bay, no matter how it gets twisted by MAGA. It is the truth, okay? So this is incredible if that actually goes down, the amount of disruption it's going to cause. And if there is no trade between the United States and China, then what's stopping them from wanting to do this? What's stopping them from wanting to basically make the Strait of Taiwan, in which I can't remember the exact statistics, but I think it's something to the tune of like 40% of global marine cargo goes through here. Now they can go around here, but I think it's something to do with the, I don't know if it's like the, not the jet stream. I don't know enough about it, but I know most of the ships go through here instead of here. Maybe it's something to do with ocean currents or something like that. I don't know. I think that's what it is. So if they can't do that, then they have to do a wicked detour. It's going to be far more costly, and you know, it's just going to be harder to get stuff, and that's going to be inflationary. War is inflationary, and that is something to keep in mind. Okay, what else do we got going on here? Okay, talked about that. China has vowed to fight tariffs to the end, firmly rejecting pressure and threats, emphasizing that this is not the right way to engage. We will safeguard our legitimate rights and interests, says Lu Pingyu, spokesman for Beijing's embassy in the U.S. And he had a very quick, cryptic tweet today. The Chinese embassy in the United States, they just basically tagged Trump in a tweet and didn't say anything, which was strange. Maybe they intended to write something and they forgot to cut and paste, or maybe it was an accident, or maybe they were just trying to send Trump a signal of sorts, but we're definitely in inauspicious times. There's no doubt about that. Estonia wants to sink dangerous merchant ships. Okay, let's see what happens when you do that. Estonia. You see, you give them a little rope, they want to be a cowboy. Germany says, okay, we're going to put 5,000 troops in. All of a sudden, Estonia is trying to sink Russian merchant ships. Well, if they do that, I can guarantee you there's going to be, what is it, Tallinn? Is that the capital? There's going to be a few arrivals, as they say in Russia, to that region. It won't take long, unfortunately. So, but, you know, Chihuahuas bark the loudest. And that's not a slight against the Estonian people, it's just the war hawks in that region. They got to be a bit more pragmatic about these matters. You're not going to be able to fight the Russians. I mean, they could literally send a few brigades in there and probably have the place locked down relatively quickly. This is what the Chinese are putting out on TikTok, kind of making fun of the American ambition to bring the factories back. So we think that it's going to be making cars, you know, Henry Ford, living wage, all that stuff. But again, this is why Reagan was against it, because it's just communism for corporations. Because you don't have to compete globally. You don't have to make a better product because it's not a fair, open, and free market. It's communism, guys, okay? So can you really imagine a situation like this? Now, of course, as Lutnick says, don't worry, it's all going to be, we're going to bring the jobs back, but it's all going to be automation. So there's contradictions right there. Oh yeah, we're going to, you know, we're going to cancel the income tax because, you know, all these countries are going to pay tariffs. Well, you know, what if they decide that they don't want to trade because it's too expensive? Then they're not going to pay tariffs. So I guess we're going to pay income taxes and we're going to be working in jobs like this. And I gotta say, I don't know, it might be a while before automation completely replaces the seamstress, but this is, you know, I mean, I get this guy's making bras, this guy's making phones. I get that we don't want to be a service-based economy when World War III starts. I get it. You don't want to be that. But do you want to be writing the code or do you want to be building the machines in a place like this? That's just an honest question that people have to ask themselves, okay? So there's just a reality to this, and this is why the whole motivation for these tariffs is just bullshit. The reason why they're doing it is because they need to rearm for World War III. And I, in fact, caught Elon Musk today in a statement that he made. Let me see here. Okay, so here's what Elon says, or he retweeted somebody who says, any country that can manufacture its own drones will be a vassal state, right? Who can't manufacture its own drones. Elon says, bullseye. And so my response was, the US manufactures the most expensive and capable drones on Earth. But I think this guy is referring to like quadricopter, you know, Ukraine front line style drones, right? Which the United States, Lockheed Martin, you know, Northrop Grumman, these kind of companies could make this shit already. So I don't really understand what the big deal is here. But even if they didn't, you would need a global trade war to build low-level, you wouldn't need a global trade war to build low-level quadricopter drones. You wouldn't. You could just get the military to build that at the taxpayer expense. You could do that, right? Sure, it might cost you a little bit more, but you could do it easily. You're talking military, not civilian market here. You're basically tacitly admitting the whole thing is about rearmament, which is what it is about, because they could easily build quadricopter drones. If it was what he's talking about, will be a vassal state. So you're talking about military drones, right? The United States already builds military drones, but this is a tacit admission that these tariffs are about re-mobilization, about war mobilization, and about military industrialization. That's a lot of Asians, isn't it? Looks like they're going to reboot the movie Threads, and it's going to be turned into a drama. Let's hope they don't ruin it. I have a sneaking suspicion that the woke police are going to have a heyday when that one comes out. They're going to have all the boxes checked. Oh boy, I was going to show you guys a video that I seen today. It was like some kind of furry competition or something. And there was people like competing to see who could be the best. It was like a, you know, you have dog shows, but it was like people walking their human dog. And oh God, all the Chinese have to do is just wait and they will win. Anyways, that's all I got for you today. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe.